The cold cobblestone against my cheek was my last memory. I died in a gutter, coughing blood into the rain, while my mother drank champagne at a royal gala. I had spent my entire first life begging for a single scrap of her affection. But when I opened my eyes and realized I was 10 years old again, standing on the dusty floorboards of our apartment, while she packed her bags, I did not cry. I did not reach for her hand. I stepped back and finally let her go. The smell of cheap gin and stale lavender hit me first. It clung to the damp wallpaper of our cramped apartment. The dim yellow light from the naked bulb overhead stung my eyes. I pulled in a deep breath and froze. No blood, no rattling cough, no crushing weight in my chest. I looked down at my hands. They were small and unblemished. The ragged scars from years of workhouse labor were gone. The missing fingernail on my left hand, torn out by a loan shark collecting my mother's debts, was perfectly intact. I was 10 years old. Don't just stand there, staring like a witless stray Evelyn. The voice sent a physical jolt through me. I turned slowly. Vivienne, my mother, stood beside the sagging mattress, forcing silk dresses into a battered leather trunk. She looked exactly as she did in my oldest memories, unforgivingly beautiful, golden hair pinned into immaculate waves, red lipstick painted with care, and a tailored crimson coat that cost more than 6 months of our rent. I'm leaving, she said without meeting my eyes. She snapped the trunk shut with a sharp metallic click. Lord Blackwood is waiting in the motor car downstairs. He's taking me to the capital, to his estate. Then she turned toward me, already wearing the familiar expression of a woman bracing for an inconvenience. She was waiting for tears. In my first life, I had given her exactly what she expected. I threw myself around her legs, sobbing until I choked, begging her not to leave. My hysteria became so loud that Lord Blackwood's driver came upstairs. Humiliated, Vivienne slapped me across the face, dragged me by the ear, and had me thrown into the back of the motor car like unwanted luggage. That single act of desperation sealed my fate. For the next 2 decades, I lived as the unwanted bastard attached to the Blackwood household. I became the scapegoat for Vivienne's indiscretions, the punching bag for her new stepchildren, and eventually the easiest collateral when the family's debts caught up with them. When the creditors came, Vivienne pointed her manicured finger at me and slipped out the back door. I died freezing in an alley, clutching a crumpled newspaper, clipping of her smiling at a society gala. Did you hear me? Evelyn Vivienne snapped. She pulled on her leather gloves with impatient little jerks. I am going. A man like Blackwood doesn't want another man's baggage. It's a miracle he's taking me at all. I can't drag a child into high society. You would only ruin it for me. She took a step closer. You understand that, don't you? For the first time in either life, I looked at her without the desperate need for her approval. I did not see a mother. I saw a frightened, selfish woman searching for a richer life. I saw someone who would abandon anything that threatened it. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Rain began to strike the single grimy window. I understand, I said. Vivienne froze. You do? Yes. I stepped aside, clearing her path to the door. You shouldn't keep Lord Blackwood waiting. Her carefully drawn eyebrows knitted together. She studied my face, looking for the tantrum, the tears, the trick. When she found nothing, something ugly crossed her expression. It was not guilt. It was offense. She was leaving me forever, and her vanity could not tolerate the fact that I was not devastated. Mrs. Finch down the hall. Said she'd bring you some bread tomorrow, she muttered. The rent is paid until Tuesday. The orphanage in the lower district takes in strays on Wednesdays. I'll manage. She grabbed the trunk handle and walked past me. Her perfume washed over the room, expensive and cloying. At the door, she hesitated with one gloved hand on the brass knob. It's for the best, Evelyn, she whispered. For both of us. Goodbye, Vivienne. She flinched at her first name. Then she left. Her footsteps faded down the wooden stairwell until the rain swallowed them. I went to the cracked window. A black motor car idled on the wet street below. The driver loaded her trunk. Vivienne slipped into the back seat, and through the rain-streaked glass, looked up toward our apartment one last time. I did not wave. I pulled the ragged curtain shut. The silence settled around me. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. I had no mother. Almost no food, very little money. And 4 days before I would be evicted. I started laughing. For the first time in 2 lifetimes. I was free. Tuesday came with the landlord. Mr. Doyle was a large, sweating man who smelled of boiled cabbage and cheap tobacco. When he kicked open the door, he expected to find a crying child with nothing but the clothes on her back. Instead, he found me sitting on a wooden crate in the middle of an almost empty room. I had not wasted the 4 days Vivienne gave me. I stripped the apartment of anything she had abandoned that still carried value. Brass cabinet knobs, copper wiring from a broken radio, 2 decent wool blankets, and the tarnished silver mirror she had left because of the crack. I sold everything to a pawnbroker 3 streets away. 16 silver shillings sat in my pocket. Not a fortune to an adult. To a 10-year-old girl in the industrial slums, it was a beginning. Out Mr. Doyle barked. I stood and brushed the dust from my faded gray skirt. I left the keys on the windowsill. Mr. Doyle. I scrubbed the floorboards. You won't need to hire a cleaner before the next tenant. He blinked. Thrown by the businesslike tone coming from a child. Before he could recover, I slung my canvas bag over my shoulder and walked past him. I did not go to the lower district orphanage. I knew enough about that place from my first life. It turned desperate children into pickpockets, exhausted laborers, or corpses. Typhus alone killed more girls there than anyone bothered to count. Instead, I walked for 2 hours through the industrial quarter, crossed the iron bridge, and entered the merchant district. I needed shelter, but I also needed access. Jude's home for girls sat on a quiet cobblestone street behind the textile markets. A rigid woman named Mrs. Harrow ran the place. St. Jude's called itself a home, but everyone knew what it was. A workhouse disguised as a convent. The girls cleaned dormitories, mended clothes for local tailors, and scrubbed the parish floors in exchange for food and a bed. I pulled the brass bell. Mrs. Harrow opened the heavy oak door. She was tall, broad, and hard-eyed. We aren't taking beggars. I'm not begging. I took 4 silver shillings from my pocket and held them flat on my palm. I'm looking for boarding. I can mend seams, keep ledgers, and read at a secondary school level. I'll pay my first month in advance and work for the rest. Her eyes dropped to the coins. Practicality 1. Bed 42, 3rd floor, she said, taking the money. Breakfast is at 6. If you're late, you don't eat. If you bleed on the linens, you wash them yourself. Understood, understood. I stepped inside. The hallway smelled of bleach and lye. but compared with the rot of Vivienne's apartment, it smelled almost clean enough to be luxurious. Life-etched. Jude's was brutally monotonous, and that suited me perfectly. I became useful and invisible. While other girls fought over extra rations or cried for families that had abandoned them, I worked. I mended, scrubbed, sorted, counted, and kept my mouth shut. I never gave Mrs. Harrow a reason to punish me twice. Within 2 months, she removed me from the mending room and placed me in the parish office to organize donation ledgers. That was exactly where I wanted to be. Information was the only currency I trusted more than money. From the parish ledgers, I could see the financial pulse of the merchant district. I learned which businesses were failing, which aristocrats were hiding debt, and which men controlled the shipping lanes. That was how I found Marcus Mercer. According to the parish records, Marcus Mercer was a wealthy tea importer who donated generously to Jude's every quarter. My 30-year-old memory knew something those ledgers did not. In my first life, a scandal had nearly destroyed him around this exact time. One of his captains was using Mercer tea shipments to smuggle refined opium. The Royal Guard discovered the contraband, and although Mercer eventually proved he had not ordered it, the investigation nearly cost him, his company, and his life. I needed a patron with money, influence, and a reason to trust me. More specifically, I needed someone powerful who would owe me. On a cold Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Harrow sent me to deliver parish mail. I took a detour to the docks. Mercer's warehouse was a massive brick building crowded with laborers unloading wooden tea crates. I slipped past the shouting foreman and climbed the iron stairs to the overseer's office. The door was ajar. Marcus Mercer sat behind a mahogany desk, rubbing his temples over a shipping manifest. He was in his 40s, lean and sharp-featured, with silver beginning to creep into his dark hair. I knocked twice. He did not look up. I told you to stack the eastern crates in Section 4. Get out. If you let Captain Hayes ship dock tomorrow morning without inspecting the hold, the Royal Guard will find 80 pounds of refined opium hidden beneath your tea. Marcus stopped moving. Slowly he raised his head. What did you just say? The Crimson Gull docks at dawn, I said. Hayes is bypassing customs by bribing the harbor master. A rival merchant has already sent an anonymous tip to the guard. If that cargo reaches your warehouse, your name will be on it, and the Crown will seize your assets by noon. His chair scraped hard against the floor as he stood. Who sent you? Which syndicate? No one. Who are you? My name is Evelyn. I held his stare. And I'm looking for an investment opportunity. For several seconds, Marcus said nothing. He was a man who had built his fortune by trusting instinct on vicious trade routes. And instinct was now telling him not to dismiss the absurd sight in front of him. A scrawny 10-year-old girl in a workhouse uniform, calmly describing a threat to his empire. If you're lying, he said, his voice dropping, I'll have the constable haul you in for industrial espionage. Your age won't save you. If I'm lying, you lose 1 hour of sleep. If I'm telling the truth, you keep your head attached to your neck. I crossed my arms. Take a rowboat past the harbor markers tonight. Intercept the Crimson Gull before it reaches the checkpoints. Search the bottom layer of tea crates marked with red wax. Remove what you find. Then let the Royal Guard search the ship in the morning. I did not wait for permission to leave. The walk back to Jude's was bitterly cold. My uniform did little against the coastal wind. But my mind was too busy to notice. I had played my first major card. If my memories were wrong, or if Marcus was too proud to listen to a child, I would spend the rest of my second life scrubbing parish floors. That night, I lay awake in bed 42, while 30 girls coughed, breathed, and shifted around me in the dark. Dawn came gray and miserable. I swept the dining room. I boiled oats. I sorted donation slips. At exactly 10 o'clock, the heavy doors of Jude's opened with a crash. Mrs. Harrow's boots pounded down the corridor. The parish office door swung inward. "Evelyn," she said tightly, "pack your trunk." Marcus Mercer stepped into the room behind her. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled. His tie hung loose, and he smelled of brine and sweat. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, but the look he gave me was razor sharp. "Leave us." "Mrs. Harrow." The matron glanced toward him, then toward the heavy pouch of coins he had apparently already placed on her desk. She left. Marcus waited until the door shut. £80, he said. 80 pounds of refined opium, packed in waterproof canvas beneath 6 tons of Assam tea. I said nothing. The Royal Guard tore the Crimson Gull apart at sunrise. They stripped floorboards. They questioned Hayes for 3 hours. They found nothing. "Because you removed it." "Because I removed it." He leaned against the desk. "Hayes confessed on the rowboat. A syndicate paid him to use my cargo as cover. I watched 100,000 shillings worth of contraband sink into the harbor mud." His eyes fixed on mine. "You saved my business. Evelyn, you may have saved my life." He paused. "Who are you really?" "I told you. I'm an investment opportunity." I closed the ledger in front of me. "I don't have a family. I don't have a home worth returning to. But I have an excellent memory, a sharp mind, and a better understanding of this city's future than anyone my age should. I want out of st." Jude's Marcus let out a dry laugh. "Done, I'll adopt you. You'll live at my estate and attend a proper boarding school." "No," his expression changed. "No, I don't want a father. I don't want to play the grateful daughter of a wealthy benefactor. I want a desk in your central office, a salary, access to your ledgers, shipping routes, and political correspondence. You teach me the trade. On paper, I can be your ward. In practice, I become your apprentice." I leaned forward. "In return, I make Mercer Shipping more powerful than it would ever become without me." Marcus stared at me, searching for some crack in the performance, some childish fantasy beneath the words. He found none. "You're a terrifying creature," he murmured. Then, he pulled a fountain pen from his breast pocket and placed it on the desk. "Draft the terms." I did. My handwriting was small, sharp, and precise. I wrote a contract covering my salary, lodging, education, access to the business, and the strict boundaries of our relationship. Marcus signed. Then I did. I was 10 years old when I became a merchant lord's legal ward and practical apprentice. I was not signing my life away. I was buying it back. 8 years is a long time when you spend every waking hour preparing for a war no one else knows is coming. By my 18th birthday, Mercer Shipping no longer moved only tea. We moved coal, steel, and textiles. We owned warehouses, sections of the docks, and enough political influence to make officials answer our telegrams before they answered those of old aristocratic families. The public believed Marcus Mercer was a solitary genius who had somehow cornered half the city's trade. Only the men inside closed boardrooms knew the truth. When a deal needed to be crushed, A rival syndicate needed to be dismantled, or a failing company needed to be bought before anyone else understood its value. They did not deal with Marcus. They dealt with me. That was how I found myself standing on the balcony above the Royal Exchange Winter Gala, nursing a glass of sparkling water while the city's elite moved beneath me. The ballroom was a sea of velvet, diamonds, and desperation. Officially, the evening was a charity event. In reality, it was a hunting ground. Old aristocratic families, bleeding money beneath inherited titles, came to beg the rising merchant class for loans, investments, or favorable marriages. I wore a tailored black evening suit. No lace, no jewels. No heavy gown dragging behind me. The sharp shoulders and narrow waist felt like armor. "You look like you're planning a murder," Marcus murmured beside me. I did not turn. "Just an acquisition." He took a sip of scotch. "Which one?" "The Blackwood estate." That got his attention. Lord Blackwood had died 6 months earlier. The textile mills attached to his estate had been losing money for 3 years, and the creditors were closing in. Marcus frowned. "Why would you want a rotting corpse of a company?" "Because the mills themselves are worthless." I looked down at the crowd. "The land beneath them is not." The Crown had quietly approved preliminary plans for a major Eastern Railway expansion. The route had not yet been announced publicly, but survey teams had already marked a corridor through the lower industrial district. The Blackwood mills sat directly beside it. "When the route is announced," I said, "the Crown will need that land. The creditors think they're holding a dead textile company. They're actually holding a future rail corridor." Marcus's mouth curved. "And you intend to buy the debt before they realize it, for pennies on the pound. Ruthless." I learned from excellent company. Then I saw her. My breath caught for only a fraction of a second. Vivienne stood near the grand staircase. 8 years had passed, but some reactions lived deeper than thought. The crimson coat was gone. She wore a dark evening gown several seasons out of fashion, and her golden hair had lost much of its old shine. Fine lines cut around her mouth. She looked tired. More than tired, hunted. Lord Blackwood's death had clearly not left her secure. The legitimate heirs had distanced themselves, and the estate's debts had become her problem. She clutched a velvet reticule and moved from banker to banker, offering the same tragic smile to men who deliberately turned away. Marcus followed my gaze. "Who is that, a ghost?" I set down my glass. "Excuse me, it's time to work." I descended the staircase and crossed the ballroom toward the bank officials gathered near a marble alcove. Vivienne reached Mr. Pembroke first. "I was hoping we might discuss an extension on the mill loans," she said, her voice sweet with manufactured vulnerability. "As you know, my late husband." "Lady Blackwood," Pembroke interrupted, barely hiding his impatience. "The bank has already sent 3 notices. There will be no extension. Your husband's debts exceed the present value of the properties. We begin seizure proceedings at the end of the month. Surely an arrangement can be made. If I just had more time, I could find a buyer." "The bank doesn't want time," I said as I stepped beside them. "It wants its money." Pembroke straightened immediately. "Miss Evelyn, a pleasure as always." I barely looked at him. My attention was on Vivienne. She stared directly at me, and she did not recognize me. 8 years of proper nutrition had changed my face. Education and power had changed my posture. The terrified child she remembered had disappeared. But the real reason was simpler. Vivienne had never looked at me closely enough to remember me. You were looking for a buyer for the Blackwood textile mills. I understand. I asked, her eyes lit with desperate hope. Yes, I am Lady Vivienne Blackwood, I know. And you're interested? Very. 10 minutes later. We sat across from each other, in a private smoking room off the ballroom. The air smelled of roasted almonds, cedar, and expensive liquor. My lawyer, Mr. Whittaker, stood near the door with a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. Vivienne spent several minutes trying to turn financial collapse into a temporary inconvenience. The machinery is slightly dated, she admitted, twisting the clasp of her purse. But the workforce is robust, with a modest injection of capital. Perhaps 30,000 shillings. The Blackwood mills could dominate the eastern sector again. My husband simply lacked the vision to see it through. She leaned toward me. You strike me as a woman of vision, Miss Evelyn. I looked at the glass of water on the table between us. The machinery isn't dated, Lady Blackwood. It's obsolete. Her smile stiffened. 2 boilers failed last winter and were never replaced. Your workers are striking because they haven't been paid since October. The mills are operating at roughly a 40% deficit. I let the silence stretch for a beat. And the estate owes the central bank exactly 112,000 shillings, payable at the end of the month. The color drained from her face. How could you possibly know the exact figure? I know the exact figures behind every failing enterprise in this city that might be worth buying. Her brittle smile disappeared completely. I didn't bring you in here to hear a sales pitch for a dead company. I continued. I brought you here because I can keep the creditors from destroying what is left of your life. At the mention of creditors, her throat moved. The bank is going to seize the mills, she whispered. And the manor. They are. Unless someone buys the debt. Correct. Hope returned so quickly, it was almost painful to watch. If you buy the mills, I could keep the manor. I would only need a stipend. A small percentage of the profits. I have a certain standing to maintain. I can't simply be put out on the street. I studied her face. She was 50 now. And the vanity that had once been her armor was beginning to fail. Yet, beneath the lines and fear, she was exactly the same woman who had abandoned a 10-year-old child so someone wealthier could support her. I have no interest in giving you a stipend. Her face fell. I nodded toward Whittaker. He stepped forward and placed the portfolio on the table. I will assume the 112,000 shillings in debt and settle the bank's claim. In exchange, you will transfer the textile mills, the land beneath them, and the Blackwood family manor. Vivienne gasped. The manor. You want my home. Where am I supposed to live? That is entirely your concern. I opened the portfolio and placed the contract in front of her. Then I uncapped a silver fountain pen and laid it beside the signature line. This agreement keeps you out of debtor proceedings and clears the estate's immediate obligations. You will walk away with no claim to the Blackwood assets, but you will walk away free. This is robbery, she hissed. You're stealing my life. I am purchasing your debt. You knew I had no choice. You always have a choice. I leaned back. You can refuse. You can walk back into the ballroom and tell Mr. Pembroke to continue with seizure proceedings. Or you can sign. Vivienne stared at the contract. Her breathing turned shallow. The silence felt exactly like the silence in our damp apartment 8 years earlier, when she had stood at the door deciding whether her future mattered more than mine. Slowly, her hand moved toward the pen. I have nothing else, she whispered. You have what you earned. She signed. The scratching of the nib sounded impossibly loud. When she finished, Whitaker collected the papers and slid them back into the portfolio. The transfer was complete. Vivienne stood, swaying slightly. Are you satisfied, Miss Evelyn? I looked at the woman who had left me to die in a gutter. For a second, I felt the phantom cold of cobblestone against my cheek. Then it passed, immensely. 3 days after the gala, the Crown officially announced the Eastern Railway expansion. The news hit the merchant district like a shockwave. The proposed route would cut directly through the lower industrial quarter, requiring the Crown to acquire several blocks of land. The obsolete Blackwood mills sat on some of the most valuable acreage in the entire corridor. Overnight, the debt I had absorbed for 112,000 shillings became an asset worth nearly 2 million. The financial papers called me a visionary. Bankers, who had barely acknowledged Vivienne at the gala, suddenly competed to offer me credit. Marcus poured an old scotch in his office and laughed until he nearly choked. I cared less about the praise than the opportunity. The Crown needed land, contractors, freight operators, and private capital. Mercer Shipping was positioned to profit from all four. Before any of that, I took possession of the Blackwood family manor. I arrived on another rainy Tuesday. The estate stood on a hill above the merchant district, a sprawling limestone monument surrounded by 10-foot wrought iron gates. It was exactly the kind of house a woman like Vivienne would do anything to keep. Whitaker waited on the front steps with an umbrella. The premises are vacant, Miss Evelyn, he said as I stepped from the motor car. Lady Blackwood removed her personal effects this morning. The locks have been changed. I looked at the massive double doors. In my first life, I had scrubbed the floors behind them. I had hidden in drafty servant corridors to avoid Vivienne's stepchildren. I had watched debt collectors drag me from this house, while my mother slipped out through another door. Now I owned every stone, floorboard, and pane of glass. Gut the interior, I said. Whitaker blinked all of it. Tear out the wallpaper. Remove the carpets. Sell the furniture at auction. Convert the ground floor into our new corporate headquarters. The upper floors will be my private residence. He hesitated. Leave no trace of the people who lived here before. It took 6 months. By winter, the Blackwood Manor was almost unrecognizable. Black marble replaced the faded floors. Dark oak filing cabinets lined walls that had once held silk tapestries. Telegraph machines clicked in former drawing rooms. Clerks and accountants moved through halls where aristocrats had once danced. The locals stopped calling it the Blackwood Estate. They started calling it the Palace of Coin. One afternoon, rain hammered the high windows, while I reviewed railway contracts in the office that had once been Vivienne's bedroom. The electric call box on my desk buzzed. Miss Evelyn, my assistant, said, "There is a disturbance at the front gates." What kind of disturbance? A woman claiming she used to own the property. She refuses to leave. She says she was cheated. I set down my pen and crossed to the tall, arched window. 3 stories below, 2 guards stood inside the iron gates. On the other side, a woman clung to the bars in the pouring rain. Vivienne. Her thin coat was plastered to her body. Her once perfect golden hair hung in wet strands around her face. Whatever money she had raised by selling jewelry and dresses was gone. More important, she had learned the truth about the railway. She knew I had understood the value of the land before she signed it away. I watched her rattle the gates until exhaustion forced her to her knees in the mud. For a moment, the symmetry was almost perfect. Cold, rain stone begging. It looked too much like the night I had died in my first life. I pressed the call button, opened the gates. My assistant hesitated. Bring her into the main foyer. Do not offer her a towel. I turned from the window. The time for ghosts was over. It was time for my mother to see exactly who she had thrown away. I descended the stairs slowly. My boots struck the black marble in a measured rhythm. The main foyer had been designed to intimidate, even before I bought the estate. Now, stripped of warm tapestries and soft carpets, it was harsher still. A chandelier cast white light across polished stone. 2 guards stood beside the heavy oak doors. Vivienne waited in the center of the room. She was soaked. Mud stained the hem of her thin wool coat. Water gathered beneath her boots. When she saw me, her exhaustion vanished beneath sudden fury. You. I remember you too. You knew about the railway. I did. You stole it from May. Her voice echoed through the foyer. You bought my debt for pennies when you knew the land was worth millions. You sat in that smoking room and lied to my face. You cheated a grieving widow. I stepped off the bottom stair. I gave you an accurate description of your mills. The machinery was obsolete. The workforce was unpaid. The debt was real. You signed the contract willingly. You hid the railway. The Crown survey teams had been taking soil samples in the lower district for 8 months. Preliminary route filings were available in the magistrate's public records office. Her jaw trembled. You did not know. Because you spent your afternoons chasing society invitations, instead of reading municipal ledgers. It was fraud. Deception. I'll go to the magistrate. Go, I gestured toward the doors. Tell the magistrate that a merchant made a better investment than you. Tell him you sold property without reading public filings. Then decide how you'll pay the filing fee when you can barely afford tram fare. The fight drained out of her. Her shoulders sagged. Then she sank to her knees. The wet fabric of her coat slapped against the marble. Please, she whispered. The word was so quiet, I almost did not hear it over the rain. I have nothing. I'm sleeping in a boarding house that charges by the hour. I can't live like this. She clasped her hands in front of her chest. I only need a sliver of the sale, a fraction of a percent. I used to live here. This was my home. This was Lord Blackwood's home, I said. You occupied it while it served you. Her head snapped up. Who are you? For the first time since entering the foyer. She truly studied my face. Why do you hate me so much? I don't even know you. There it was. The question I had waited 8 years to hear. I crouched until we were eye to eye, beneath the wet wool of her coat. I caught the faint scent of cheap gin. The same scent that had filled our old apartment. You do know me, Vivienne. She recoiled at her first name. No, I would remember you. You never looked at me. Her brow furrowed. Not really. You looked at mirrors. You looked at wealthy men. You looked at every door that might lead you out of the slums. I held her gaze. You did not look at me when you packed your leather trunk. You did not look at me when you said the rent was paid. Until Tuesday, you put on a crimson coat, walked down the wooden stairs, and got into Lord Blackwood's motor car. Vivienne froze. Her eyes widened. You told me Mrs. Finch down the hall would bring bread the next morning. I continued. You told me the orphanage in the lower district took in strays on Wednesdays. Her lips parted. You left me with 16 shillings worth of scrap, a cracked mirror, and 4 days before eviction. No, the word came out broken. No, that's impossible. She shook her head, spraying rainwater from her hair. Evelyn, you were 10. I am 18 now. I stood. And I am exactly what survived you. The foyer went silent. Even the guards shifted. Vivienne remained on her knees, staring at me, as if she were trying to force the 10-year-old child. She remembered into the woman standing above her. Then, her survival instinct took over. The horror on her face transformed almost instantly into maternal relief. Evelyn. She lunged forward and wrapped both arms around my knees. Oh my God, my baby. I thought you were dead. I sent letters to the orphanage. But they told me they had no record of you. I prayed every night. Blackwood wouldn't take a child. I had to secure the marriage first. And then I was going to send for you. I swear it. It was an excellent performance. In my first life, I would have believed every word, because I had needed to believe them. I looked down at her hands, gripping my trousers. Let go of me. We're together now, she rushed on. We have the manor back. We have everything. You're so clever, Evelyn. I can help you. I know all the society families. We don't need anyone else. Let go. I stepped back hard enough to break her grip. She caught herself on the wet marble and looked up at me. Evelyn, it's me. It's your mother. My mother left me to freeze in a tenement. Her expression tightened. My mother sold her responsibility for a crimson coat and a place in Lord Blackwood's motor car. The woman in front of me is a debtor who returned only after discovering that the child she abandoned became wealthy. You can't do this, she gasped. I'm your blood. I gave birth to you. I raised you. You kept me alive until I became inconvenient. I turned slightly toward the shadows beside the staircase. I bled at Jude's scrubbing floors. I bled in Mercer's shipyards, learning the trade. My work is in every ledger in this building. You do not get to claim the life I built simply because you recognize my name. Now, Whittaker. My lawyer stepped forward. Yes, Miss Evelyn. Please have the guards escort Lady Blackwood to the front gates. If she returns to the property, have the constable charge her with trespassing. Vivienne screamed. It was not the sound of a heartbroken mother. It was the sound of someone realizing that the last door had closed. The guards took her by the arms. You monster, she shrieked as they dragged her backward. I gave you life. You owe me. You owe me everything. The doors opened, and freezing winds swept rain across the threshold. I paid your debt at the bank. I called after her. She stared at me. Our accounts are settled. The guards took her outside. Whittaker shut the doors. The brass locks clicked into place. Silence returned to the foyer. Only one thing remained. A muddy puddle where Vivienne had knelt. Whittaker looked down at it. Shall I call for a porter, ma'am? Yes, I turned toward the staircase. And bring the updated quarterly reports to my office. We have a railway to build. I climbed the stairs without looking back. For the first time in either life. Leaving my mother behind required no strength at all. The Eastern Railway officially opened 3 years later. I was 21 years old. The morning of the inaugural run was brutally cold. The sky was the color of bruised iron, and white steam rolled across the new central station. As a massive black locomotive waited on the tracks, the mayor, City magistrates, bankers, and reporters crowded the platform around me. 3 years earlier, the Blackwood mills had been a bankrupt pile of rust. Now, a railway ran through the land they had occupied, and Mercer Shipping held the freight contracts that would feed it. The mayor handed me a pair of ceremonial silver shears. I cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed. To the future of the city. The mayor proclaimed, lifting a glass of champagne. To the future. I replied. I set my own untouched glass on a passing tray. The applause meant very little to me. The railway did. It moved coal, steel, textiles, and money. More important, it proved that the world that had once crushed me could be studied, understood, and rebuilt. An hour later, my motor car carried me away from the station. Whitaker sat in front reviewing telegrams. The first freight loads have already left the docks, he said. Revenue projections are ahead of schedule. Mr. Mercer would like to meet at the estate at 6. Tell Marcus I'll be there. Parade traffic forced us through the far edge of the lower district. The streets were still narrow there, dark with soot and lined with crumbling boarding houses. I watched butcher shops, pawn windows, and exhausted laborers slide past the glass. Then, the car slowed at an intersection. I saw her. Vivienne was kneeling in front of a cheap laundry, scrubbing stone steps with a coarse brush and a bucket of gray water. For a moment, I barely recognized her. Her golden hair had gone dull and gray, tied back with a frayed strip of cloth. Her hands were red and raw from lye. A patched dress hung loosely from her thinner frame. A heavy-set man stepped out of the laundry and pointed angrily at a missed patch of stone. He kicked the bucket, spilling dirty water across the steps. In my first life, Vivienne would have screamed at him. Now she lowered her head, reached for the brush, and started again. The intersection cleared. As our car rolled forward, she looked up. Her exhausted eyes met the dark glass of my window. But she could not see me inside. She saw only an expensive motor car and a world that had moved beyond her. Then she looked down and returned to work. I watched until she disappeared behind us. I felt no triumph, no anger, no grief. That was when I finally understood the difference between revenge and freedom. Hate still gives another person a place inside you. Indifference gives you the room back. By the time we reached the Palace of Coin, Vivienne was no longer on my mind. Marcus waited in the foyer, leaning on a silver-headed cane. Age had stiffened his joints, but his eyes were as sharp as the day I first walked into his harbor office. I saw the papers, he said. The railway is running, we did it. He shook his head. I provided capital. You provided execution. His expression softened. I'm retiring at the end of the year, Evelyn. I'm going to the coast. I stopped. Marcus looked around the black marble foyer. The syndicate is yours. All of it for a moment. I said nothing. I thought of bed 42S Jude's. The cracked apartment window. 16 shillings in my pocket. A red coat disappearing down a stairwell. The cold cobblestones beneath my cheek in another life. Then I took a slow breath. My lungs filled completely. No blood, no rattle, no fear. The past had once seemed like a prison I would carry forever. Now it was only a set of lessons I had already paid for. I looked at Marcus. Draft the terms. That was how my second life truly began. Vivienne had spent hers chasing wealth, because she believed money could make other people value her. In the end, she lost everything, because she never learned the difference between being wanted and being useful. I learned something different. A second chance is not valuable because it lets you punish the people who hurt you. It is valuable because it lets you stop building your future around them. Vivienne abandoned me once. I refused to abandon myself twice. So tell me, did Vivienne get exactly what she deserved? Or did Evelyn take her revenge too far? If this story kept you listening, share your answer in the comments. And subscribe for more high-stakes stories of betrayal, second chances, and revenge.